Hello and welcome to Good Evening Britain, a Force for Good's weekly show coming to you live from our studios here in the heart of the great British city of Glasgow, with me, your host, Alistair McConnachie. We are broadcasting on all our digital platforms throughout the United Kingdom and across the world. We're bringing you quality pro-UK comment and analysis every Wednesday from 7 until 8 p.m. on Facebook, on YouTube, on X, and also on TikTok. Folks, please do send in your greetings. Tell us where in this great British country of ours you are viewing from, or indeed anywhere in the world. Say hello to us. We love to hear from you. It's going to be a great show tonight. At the bottom of the hour at 7:30, we have our good friend and colleague, Ash, that Preston journalist who has got a lot to say at all times about Scottish politics. And today we're going to be looking at the legacy of Mr. Alexander Elliot Anderson Salmond, who passed away. And that was our man, Ash. Let's get him back up there again on screen. He is the fellow who will be speaking with us, our guest, the brilliant Ash, not to be missed. So please do stick around to hear what Ash has got to say about Alex Salmond, and indeed much else, and Scottish politics in general. And will it ever be the same again? Is it going to get better? Is it going to get worse? Or is it going to be much the same? That's my question to you. And hopefully you will have an answer. And if you do send in your comments, we will read them out. We'll read them out, send them in on TikTok, on YouTube, on X, and on Facebook. And please, folks, give us a like, hit that thumbs up button. Hit that share as well. Let's get this shared around. So if you're on X, please repost this or post it ideally with a quote comment, and then we can repost that quote comment of yours to upwards of 28,000 people. Share us, please, on Facebook and on TikTok also. Let's get the thumbs up and join us and subscribe as well. Good. Well, that's the formalities over. Got a lot to talk about tonight. One of the things, as I say, we're going to be looking at Alex Salmond and just really considering what we thought of him. Now, on the day that he did pass away, which was Saturday, we put up a short article about him, and we noted that he certainly was a standout figure in Scottish politics. He took the SNP from a largely fringe group right into the mainstream, right up until the point where it could almost have and almost did destroy the United Kingdom, and certainly to the point where the United Kingdom was never quite the same again after that referendum in 2014. So he was certainly a standout and significant part of our lives in that regard, a very influential politician. If you liked him, you thought he influenced things for the better. If you didn't like his politics, you very much thought that he influenced things very much for the worse. He was certainly an accomplished speaker as well, and an accomplished performer, and a charismatic one as well, much more so than the people that we've got in Holyrood at the moment. And there's nobody really like him on the scene coming up that I can see in any of the parties, the mainstream parties, that is, at this stage. And so we concluded in our short article that we posted on Saturday night that he was a transformative figure in Scottish and British politics, transforming for the worse or the better, depending upon your political points of view. And I was reading a short article again by Alan Cochrane in the Daily Telegraph, and he kind of summed it up. He goes, quote, This is from his article on Sunday, the 13th of October, in the Sunday Telegraph. He says, in my view, Alex Salmond was a significant, though ultimately misguided political figure, wasn't he, really, when you think about it? Very misguided. Why would you want to destroy the greatest union the world has ever known, among the greatest people the world has ever known? Very misguided, very misguided. However, Cochrane goes on, in many ways, he was a giant compared to the political lightweights now running a devolved Scotland. Well, that's what we said, isn't it? All politicians have big egos. It comes with the job, but he won't be the last to fall for believing himself invincible. At the end of the day, independence was and is a fool's errand, but it stood its best chance under him. Cochrane there implying that it's not going to have a better chance now that he's gone and that there's nobody of similar stature on the scene. Well, that's certainly true for the short term. But of course, as we know with politics, things can change very quickly. All sorts of people can come on the scenes. All sorts of money can come on the scenes. And all sorts of external influences can come on the scenes as well. And before you know it, you can be living very quickly in a transformed political environment. And so we here at A Force for Good, while we know there's not going to be another referendum in the next few years anyway, very, very unlikely there'll be one under the Labour government unless the SNP did tremendously well in 2026, which I don't think they're likely to do. Even though we know that we've got some breathing space, we never stop promoting the value of the United Kingdom. We never stop promoting our daily work to big up the UK, to big up Britain, which is what we're all about. Because ultimately it is a battle of the hearts and minds and souls of the people. And people need to have a reason to be part of the United Kingdom. And sometimes when we look at our politicians, it can seem extremely bad, but is it really going to be any better if we separated under the present political class that we have here in Scotland? The answer is no, of course not. So the union is definitely the way to keep us all together and to keep the United Kingdom going for the long term. And we're in this fight for the long term, folks. This is not something that we are ever going to give up. Now, some people have asked there, why are we flying the Battle of Britain flag in the background? Well, on this day in British history, we'll be talking about the first dogfight of the Spitfires over Britain, which was on this day in 1939 over the skies of Scotland. We'll be talking about that in our On This Day. And we'll also be running a small competition afterwards. We'll be asking a question, and the winner will not only get a load of our drink mats, a selection of them, but will also get this, which is a unique sticker that you can put over your light switch, so that if you're struggling for the light in the dark, you click this on, the first thing you see is a Union Jack flag. And to enter our competition, you send an email to contact@aforceforgood.uk with the answer. But that'll be coming up in 15 minutes or so. So stick around for that as well. Let's say hello to some people who have come in. Hey, Debbie was first in tonight. Good to see you, Debbie. Good to have you back, Alistair. Been a long 3 weeks. Well, what we were doing was a lot of reading and research. We had a box, and I mean a big box of cuttings in the office here on immigration issues, which, wait for this, go back to 1996. And that's been in our office and getting filled up daily. And I thought to myself, that needs to get filed properly. And so for the last week, we've been filing all of those cuttings, and we've been finding some great articles, which we will, I mean, a lot of these articles were published before even the internet was out. So we'll be rehashing a few of those through our social media platforms in the next few weeks. But the main reason for doing that was because volume 2 of a big book for the union is going to be on that very issue. It's going to be about Britain's borders, because if we have a union and if we have a nation, we also have to have borders. And it seems to us that our politicians don't seem to grasp that fact, especially our SNP and our Labour and our Lib Dem and our Tory and our Green politicians. In fact, that's all the mainstream politicians don't seem to grasp that. Thankfully, a few of the fringe parties do grasp that, and that's why they're going to make headway in 2026. But more of that in a moment. Derek says, good evening, Alistair and fellow unionists. Good to see you back. It's shocking what Labour is doing to the pensioners, as well as the SNP are at it as well. I agree. Catherine says, hello. At Litigation says, hi all. And Alan says, good evening. Good evening to you, Alan. Stephen refers to Mr. Alexander Elliot Anderson Salmond and says he was a failure. He only energised around 30% of the total Scottish electorate, and a clear 55% of those who voted backed the union. Thank goodness that they did. Oksana says hi all, and good to see Anthony in the house. Hope you are well, sir. Derek says, we used to speak of the Battle of Britain. Today it's the battle in Britain. So much it seems like. And hello to Kat. Hey to you too. Yes. So talking about Derek there alluded to Labour and the SNP not supporting the pensioners. Well, what do we think about this? Holyrood backs asylum seekers free bus pass. Can you believe that? Let me read something to you. This was Humza Yousaf, the former First Minister, confirmed in November last year that free bus travel would be provided in Scotland to people seeking asylum. The Scottish Greens, who were then his coalition partners, pushed for the move and argued it could be, quote unquote, life-saving to get on a bus. Indeed, in fact, you're more likely to have your life saved if you get off the bus these days, quite frankly. I'm exaggerating, of course. However, the SNP scrapped the plan 2 months ago, blaming a lack of money. In the same month, the SNP announced that almost 1 million Scottish pensioners will lose their winter fuel payments from this year. So it's back on the agenda again, and one of the reasons that it's back on the agenda is that the SNP feel they need to butter up the green MSPs for whatever reason, and we know that green MSPs love to get buttered up, right? So the SNP feel they need to do that, and basically a vote was taken. Now it's a non-binding vote. So it's not going to become law, but it's going to be advisory in some way going forward. MSPs voted, it says here, by a margin of 68 to 27 to back the Green call for free bus travel for asylum seekers. Only the Tories opposed the call, while, get this, Labour MSPs backed the policy in principle, but abstained after an SNP amendment which demanded that the UK government, which is to say the Labour government, provide extra funding. So the Labour people supported that in principle. They just didn't like the way that it was going to be funded. Okay, so we've got to think about this with Labour. Okay, where's the difference here between the SNP and Labour? The only difference is that Labour don't want a referendum, basically. That's the only difference we're getting here. On matters like immigration and asylum and money for asylum seekers, Labour will just follow the SNP. And Anas Sarwar is going to just follow the SNP on all of these things as well. And if he got into power, he would be bringing in something like this. So let's not have too rosy eyes when we are looking at Labour on these matters. Anyway, let's keep an eye on where that ends up. Probably not in a good place. One or two comments here on TikTok. Let's see what ones can be read out on a family show. There's an argument going on there between the Maori Scotsman and another person. John Snow says Britain will become an Islamic country soon. Tommy Johnston says he's not from Glasgow. Good guys, just keep that debate going. It looks like it's interesting. The Maori Scotsman says the British Empire was a Protestant empire. Okay, I'll leave you two guys to that one. Alan says workers get nothing but bills whilst everyone else rakes it in. Hello to Scotland Scorpion. Knights Hospitaller. Knights Hospitalier says, I like that insignia. That is the British military insignia. Are you referring to that? Per Ardva ad Astru means through struggle to adversity. No, through struggle to the stars, or through adversity to the stars. Through adversity to the stars is what that means. It's the RAF insignia. Alan says that Labour are a danger. They had the SNP on the ropes. They've blown their chance of a Holyrood win now. Well, we're going to discuss with Ash when he comes on about that exactly, because the Labour could really muck it up between now and 2026, especially in regards to things like energy. Ed Miliband wants to move to the green transition faster than Scotland can adapt to it. And he wants to basically stop all oil and gas exploration in the North Sea, just straight away if he could. And he might manage to do that. Well, that will plunge Scotland into a big crisis of jobs and income as well, because the North Sea brings in taxis, and it also keeps thousands of people employed, not just on the rigs, but in the overall economy that comes from that. And in that overall economy, that also brings taxes into the inland revenue. And so if you cut off that, if you de-industrialise in that way too fast, then Labour are going to be in a big problem in Scotland. The SNP and the Tories will reap the benefit of Labour's foolishness when it comes to de-industrialising our carbon energy. And that's something that Labour seem to want to do, to de-industrialise the north of Scotland, to deindustrialize our oil and gas and move as quickly as possible to green energy options. Well, you can move to green energy options, but you need to keep the oil and gas there in order to get us smoothly to where you want to go. So you need a very careful transition, and it doesn't look like Labour at the moment is doing that, and so that they will suffer as a consequence, especially in the northern areas where there's certainly fewer MSPs, but they'll definitely suffer up there, and I'd be surprised if they got elected at all. Labour's base, as always, is in the central belt. Jamie says, when a government is putting illegals above nationals, something is terribly wrong, isn't it just? And I want to bring up, that's a good point, to bring in the Boris Johnson video that I want to show. And Boris Johnson was good enough to explain why during his premiership he brought in so many people into the United Kingdom. And when I say many people, in 2020, 662,000. In 2021, 891,000. In 2022, 1.2 million. Okay, these are incoming numbers. That's gross immigration in those years. Well, let's hear what Mr. Johnston has to say for himself. It's a 2-minute video.
You've got mass migration in this country, which under your watch spirals basically out of control.
Let's
you can understand why lots of Tories have deserted your party.
Yeah, but let's deal with that, because it's perfectly true that when I was Prime Minister, migration went up and down. It went down dramatically during the pandemic.
Of course it did, because you knocked us all up.
Yeah. But then, so as we came out, what happened was that we had a nightmare where we couldn't stack the shelves and we couldn't fill the stations with petrol stations with petrol. And everybody was freaking out. I remember every business group, every Department of State was saying we need more pairs of hands to get things done.
That wasn't the promise of the referendum. No, it wasn't the promise of Brexit. It was controlling our borders and limiting migration.
Inflation is a huge destroyer of prosperity, of investment. And you're too young to remember the 1970s. I remember it was absolutely appalling. And you get into an inflationary spiral, and it saps the strength of the economy completely. It saps people's prosperity. It's a disaster.
But you can see
so we had to get inflation down. And yes, I would accept that for that year, 2022, the numbers were very high. Partly because we also had the Ukrainians, we had quite rightly a lot of people from Afghanistan, a lot of people from Hong Kong. Plus, the Migration Advisory Committee said, well, we needed a lot of people to help with social care. We needed a lot of shelves and all the things. We need to keep inflation.
They've never knowingly told shut the borders those guys.
Now, of course, those decisions, in hindsight, we've learned. We can say, well, we got it wrong, or the MAC got it wrong. Or I got it. I did actually authorise those. They were taken by.
So you made it.
But because of Brexit, we're able to get it right in future.
So you can see why Brexit voters are confused by this, then, right?
And when I was Prime Minister, that is an argument I believe we could have won with the public to explain why there was that abnormality, that post-COVID bump, and why Brexit enabled us to fix it.
Oh my, so much wrong with that answer. Where to begin? But basically what he's saying is that he allowed millions, well, let's say hundreds of thousands of people into the country in order to keep inflation low. Now, the theory there is that you bring in all of these people, so you have a surplus of labor so that wages are kept low, so that you don't have to, so that wages don't increase. Because if there's a wage increase, that goes through into prices and everybody's paying more money. So in order to keep prices low, you need to keep wages low. In order to keep wages low, you have to have a huge load of surplus labor, which is what he's essentially saying. That's why he opened the borders, in order to keep wages low, in order to keep inflation low. Well, and then he goes, in hindsight, that was wrong. Well, I mean, he's the leader of the nation and he's surrounded by the cleverest, meant to be the cleverest people in the country. Why didn't he just ask me? And I would have told him, that's not going to work, Boris. That's not going to work. You know, if all you want to do is keep wages low, then here's another option. Why don't you just kill all the rich people, okay, so that you're not paying high wages to them? Oh my, that would definitely lower inflation. You know, that's another option. I don't know if he ran that through the computer or not. He probably did, actually, to see just whether that would work or not. It almost certainly would work under his crazy way of thinking. So there's more to a country than simply just keeping wages low, which really has to be the worst reason to bring in immigrants that I've ever heard. But at least we've heard it now from the horse's mouth. And I'm sure he was correct when he says that everybody was asking, all the government departments were asking for more labour, because this was made clear in this article here from the Sunday Telegraph of the 4th of August. Where are we? It's this one here. How Brexit Britain became Europe's most migrant-friendly country. And it states here, successive Home Secretaries who tried to get a grip on the problem of mass immigration have also had to contend with their own colleagues. One former Tory Home Office advisor says that the Cabinet would agree in the abstract that numbers need to come down, but each Secretary of State would make their case for a variety of exceptions. The Department of Health and Social Care was always in need of more nurses and care workers. The Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy wanted more hospitality staff. The Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs wanted more fruit pickers. The Department for Education wanted more foreign students. The Ministry of Defence wanted more visas for Afghan citizens. The list went on and on. One time we had Nadine Dorris, as Secretary of State for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport, strenuously arguing for unskilled workers' visas to be issued for road workers to help in the rollout of fibre broadband around the country. He adds, we managed to see that off because they couldn't get around the minimal language requirements. So clearly we are living in a country where the political class, whether they're Labour or Tory, they see immigration as an issue of bringing in workers in order to keep wages low, and they'll try to justify that by arguing that it also keeps inflation low. Well, sometimes it might do that in a temporary basis, but that's not a good enough reason to transform the country, because of course all sorts of other problems occur when you bring in so many people so quickly. Problems which themselves also can create higher prices, which themselves can also create inflation. So it's a very, very, very poor tool to use to control inflation. And it's potentially a nation destroying tool. And it's terrible, really, that our politicians would even consider going there in that way. And something else, and I see that our man is in the ashes in the room. He's coming up in 5 minutes. Boris also said that there was a drop in numbers post-COVID. There was a drop in net immigration, which is the difference between immigration in and emigration out. There was a drop down in the net figure, but the net figure is an irrelevant figure. As we always say, it's an irrelevant figure to use when you're looking at immigration. When you're looking at immigration, all you should concern yourself with is the gross figure, because you can control the gross figure. You can control the numbers of people coming in. You can't control the numbers of people leaving. So you cannot base your policy on a formula, a variable of which you do not control. You cannot say we're shooting for N when N is I minus E, when you do not control E emigration. And we laid this out in a new article, which we've got up on our website. We're looking at the historic norm in the United Kingdom for immigration prior to Tony Blair. And we're looking at the gross immigration figure. And we're finding that in order that it can be a guide going forward. So please check that out. We'll put the link up there in the threads. Now, just before we bring on our man Ash to talk about the legacy of Alex Salmond, today is also the date in 1958 when a children's program, Blue Peter, was first broadcast. Let's put a picture up of the two original presenters of that. Now, I'll ask you a question on this in a moment. Let me check have we got our, yep, here we go. Blue Peter, the original presenters. That is a chap called Christopher Trace and Lelia Williams, who was the winner of the Miss Great Britain a year previously. And that went on until well, it's still going on, actually. I hate to think what the program's like these days, but the golden age was definitely under those three. And indeed, arguably, there as well, which was between 1967 and 1978, thereabouts, was probably the golden age of Blue Peter. A fantastic show. Still going strong. It's the longest running children's program in the history of the world. Pleasant memories indeed. Pleasant memories indeed. I'll ask you a question about that halfway through the interview with Ash. Let's bring Ash on and let's say hello to him. Hey.
Evening, Alistair. Evening, everybody. Are you okay?
Very well, Ash. Thanks very much for coming on. And at this time, who would have thought that Alex Salmond, who is a presence in so many people's lives, would suddenly depart the scene so immediately? And did it come as a shock to you?
Yeah, it did actually. Yeah, I mean, every time I've seen him, I mean, he used to appear quite a bit on Talk TV with Mike Graham, and I believe the two of them are quite good friends. And he always seemed fairly full of life and pretty chipper. So yeah, I mean, he talked a lot of rubbish, obviously, but he always came across as pretty full of life. Yeah, I was very surprised to hear that he passed away. I was actually quite surprised to hear he was 69. I didn't realise he was that old, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
No disrespect to anyone that is, of course.
Yes. Well, he's just been a presence, and that's using a nice term in our lives for a very long time. And the last time he spoke publicly in Scotland, I think, was at the Tommy Sheridan rally a couple of months ago, maybe, if that, in George Square. No, back in September in George Square. And he was certainly looking like he was packing on the beef anyway at that particular event. And so he ends up in North Macedonia giving a lecture. And I don't know what his lecture was about, but I'm sure he was up to no good, because Macedonia separated from Yugoslavia, wasn't it?
Yeah.
A few years ago. And so he would see Macedonia as some kind of ally, probably, for the Scottish cause as he sees it. But you produced a video on it. What did you say in the video, and how was it received?
I did a video saying that Alex Salmond actually deserves respect from people. And I've had a dog's abuse ever since I made it. But I'm not rowing back on it. I mean, I'm not one to speak ill of the dead either. I mean, I don't, like yourself and like most of the people I speak to in Scotland, I'm diametrically opposed to Alex Salmond and pretty much everything that he stood for. But you've got to appreciate as well, or at least acknowledge, a talented politician, for that is what he was. And even people that I know who are unionists and they're not supporters of Scottish independence, lots of them say he was a better First Minister than some of the crap that's followed him, with Sturgeon and Swinney and Useless Yusuf. So at least, let's afford the guy a little bit of respect in death at least. He did bring in free tuition fees. I mean, that's turned out to be a bit of a disaster, to be honest with you, for Scottish students, but at least he tried. And he did bring in free prescriptions, which the SNP are now getting rid of. But again, it was something that was a positive policy. He didn't literally spend this entire time talking about breaking up the UK. And although I don't like this, he was the only person to win a majority in Holyrood when, of course, it's a system designed really for people not to have a majority. So there was talent there. It was just misguided talent. Let's put it that way.
Yes, I think so. I think misguided is the word. And to think if he had put his talent into bringing the British people together, it would be a different country, you know. But even if he had become like a Labour politician, say, he would have done extremely well. I believe, my understanding is that when he was growing up, he was born in Lithgow. When he was growing up, his father was a Labour supporter and his mother was a Conservative supporter. And how the pair of them managed to stay together, who knows? However, they made their impact on young Alexander. And so he could have been a Conservative as well, but he chose the path of division, unfortunately for us. That is, he chose that path. So, yeah, it's I totally agree with you in that he was an excellent politician in that sense, but it just shows the power of somebody that's got such skills, the power to take a country down, you know, a bad route, as it were. And I think it was a bad route that they took the country down. I would not have liked to see that, really, but he gave expression to that nationalist attitude. And maybe we can be grateful that he didn't give it, he didn't take it in a very bad way, you know, because that kind of nationalist attitude could go off the rails if you weren't careful. So I think he was always careful to control it to an extent.
One thing, of course, we can't forgive him for was the rise of Nicola Sturgeon. I mean, that was entirely his fault. But also, let's also be grateful that he himself, although he'd never admit it, was the one who killed the case for independence during the referendum. I do actually believe there was maybe through apathy, maybe for people not coming out to vote in big enough numbers at the time, there was a genuine danger that Scotland was going to vote to leave the UK. But it was Alex Salmond, let's not forget, who, when talking about the economic case, which he made quite strongly when it came to the North Sea oil and things like that, then he was asked about currency and he folded like, you know, a cheap suit. That really was a defining moment in the referendum campaign. And they could not think of an answer for what currency Scotland would use. They came up with all different sorts of reasons why they wouldn't go into the euro. They continued to use the pound, etc. And that really damaged them badly. So we can at least be grateful that Salmond didn't actually know that much about what he was talking about. He was just very ideologically driven.
Absolutely. That's a good point. Another thing that he had going for him is something called the British Civil Service, and I don't have it within reach, but he produced this massive doorstopper called Scotland's Future, which is an exact anagram of fraudulent costs. Exact anagram, which is almost, I mean, that's like, how could that be? But it's true, it is. But he didn't write a word of it. Maybe he wrote the preface to it, I think, but the rest of it was just us that paid the British civil servants to do all of this research, to answer all of the questions, and to publish this free book that you could send away for and get. And it's heavy, it weighs several pounds. And so he had everything behind him, like the entire might of the British state behind him. And we had nothing really other than David Cameron and Nick Clegg. It was the coalition government, I believe, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's who we had on our side. So it was like the least they say, the better, quite frankly. So we were kind of on our own up here against the might of the British civil service, doing everything at Alex Salmond's command.
I mean, to be fair, I mean, I think Cameron, to be fair, I think he got out and about, didn't he, and tried his best to fight the campaign. But he didn't live in Scotland. He wasn't Scottish. I don't think he understood the Scottish people or the psyche of the Scottish people. And the same can be said for Nick Clegg. So you're absolutely right. The odds were stacked against the unionist side, against our side, if you will.
Absolutely. They had everything. They had the question. They got to choose the question. They got to choose the day. They got to choose who could vote as well. Remember, they made 16-year-olds able to vote because the franchise had been devolved, so they could decide whoever wanted to vote. So they had everything going for them, and we had nothing going for us other than Alistair Darling and Gordon Brown, who were the two most vocal and generally effective speakers. And
Alistair Darling certainly was, yeah. He was a very good politician.
Yes. And also George Galloway, who was a bit of a fringe politician. But so the three of them were the kind of mouthpieces for the union, as well as the grassroots groups, such as A Force for Good and two or three other smaller groups as well, who did our best in whatever way we could at that time on, of course, no money or anything like that, but we did our best. And we won by almost 11%. Yeah. It was just within 11% of the vote, 10.8 or something like that, 10.6, I can't remember, percentage, in the biggest ever vote in the history of Britain at the time, the biggest ever number of people voting. So that should have settled it, but it didn't settle it because Gordon Brown, unfortunately, had encouraged Cameron and his coalition partner to give a whole raft of new powers to the SNP. So that meant a whole new debate was structured around more powers for Holyrood, and a whole new debate about how these weren't enough powers and how Scotland was being cheated out of powers that Brown and Cameron had promised, and so on and so forth. And it just kept that pot boiling and boiling and boiling until the time of the next general election, which was within like a couple of years, and the SNP swept the board. So rather than them being crashing and burning onto some rocky, stony ground, they basically crashed onto a nice bouncy bed, and they bounced back up again, refreshed and ready to go once more. So that was a strategic error
this
as
is the
well.
problem, isn't it? It's, we've had, since that referendum, as you just pointed out, constant appeasement. And that is a real major issue we've got. And they're still asking for more powers now to do this and that with. I mean, you give them tax powers, what happens? They raise taxes. You give them the education, it's in the doldrums. It doesn't even appear on league tables anymore. When, to say you had a Scottish education used to be a badge of honour to wear. It was one of the best educations you could get, probably the best in Europe at one time. Everything these people touch turns into a steaming pile of you-know-what. And this, still asking for powers now, still asking for referendums now. I must admit, Swinney's taking a bit of a back seat on the independence thing because he knows it's just completely out of reach anyway. It's not going to happen. And he's probably not going to be leader after 2026 anyway. But I will say one thing about the SNP, unfortunately, and this is going to be Labour's fault, and I think you alluded to it earlier as well, actually, that, Labour are really playing right into the hands of the SNP at the moment. The SNP really don't have to do a great deal. All they've got to do is sit back and point out everything that's going on inside Westminster. And as you said about the oil and gas industry, although the SNP can't really brag too much about that because they tried to get rid of it as well. But all the jobs that Labour are going to cost, the income that Labour are going to cost, the damage they're going to do to Britain's economy. And the SNP, if people aren't careful, the SNP are going to sweep the board at Holyrood in 2026.
Mm-hmm. Yes, this idea that they're going to be defeated, I'm not so sure about that at all. I think that the way things are going, it's probably going to be a hung parliament. I don't see Labour doing anything that's setting the woods on fire. No, I see them doing quite a bit that is going to upset some of the core voters. As I say, I mentioned the energy thing there. This real strong push for so-called green energy without allowing a proper transition period for the Scottish oil and gas. Do you have any thoughts on where that might go?
I made a video actually saying that Ed Miliband is probably the most dangerous man in Britain. People can look at Starmer because he's the figurehead of the government, but Starmer believes in nothing. He's not dangerous. He's just a fool who's led by the nose. Ed Miliband actually believes in this rubbish, and he is full steam ahead, trying to take away your boilers, trying to make you get expensive heat pumps, etc. He's absolutely willing to sacrifice those at least 240,000 jobs that rely on the oil and gas industry, from the people who work on the rigs to the lorry drivers who transport this stuff up and down the country. He does not care. He is willing to destroy the country if it means getting to net zero. He honestly doesn't care. He will destroy the Highlands. He will destroy parts of England like the Lake District with wind turbines, solar farms, all the rest of it. And that, as I said, politically, that's going to play into the hands of the SNP. But socially and economically for this country, it's going to be an absolute disaster. But I mean, economically, we are going to lose out on so much money. There's so much oil and gas there that we could be using. If you don't want to frack, fine. But at least, think about them towns around Aberdeen that need the hotels that might have people coming, workers staying there, or the bars and restaurants that rely on workers coming off the rigs and having a few pints and a meal and that. All this is going to be gone. Places like Aberdeen or the surrounding villages and towns will be wasteland afterwards. There'll be no reason for people to go there anymore, apart from the scenery.
Well, that's absolutely right. That's a good way of putting it. I was reading this article as well about the dangers, and Offshore Energy UK estimates that around 100,000 of the 220,000 jobs linked directly to North Sea oil and gas are in Scotland. You only need to look at the impact on hospitality and retail of the oil price shock of 2015 to see that large-scale job losses in oil and gas have significant knock-on consequences outside their own industry. Anything that negatively affects them disproportionately hits income tax receipts also. And income tax is devolved in Scotland. So if you wipe out that economy, you're not just making the cost of fuel higher, you're also lowering the income tax take that you would have got from people who were employed in and around that industry. So it could be very bad for Labour. At the SNP, of course, are in a tricky situation because, as you said, under Sturgeon, they heavily pushed the end of all carbon industry in Scotland, carbon-based industry, fossil fuels and so on. Now that she's off the scene, they might be able to do a mea culpa. They might be able to turn around and go, oh, well, that was then, this is now, we've, seen the light. And if they've got any sense, then they will do that. And they will use this as a stick to beat Labour. But some of these people, I don't know if they even have any sense. And some of them are blinded by their ideology. And they would rather see the temple fall down upon them rather than change their view on certain things. So it's...
Stephen Flynn's certainly trying to do that. And with good reason, of course. His seat is in Aberdeen. So he absolutely relies on those people voting for him. It's not exactly a vote winner to turn around and say, I'm going to take away all your jobs and all your livelihoods. But there's actually a picture, I don't know if you've seen it, there's a picture from PMQs today where, they compared the SNP to before the general election to now. And Stephen Flynn didn't even have a seat. He was just sat on the steps in the House of Commons because there wasn't any room for him. He must. There's rumours he's going to run to be an MSP, of course, and take over the SNP. I mean, whether that'll happen, I don't know. You could probably see it happening. But
I could see that happening. I can see that's where his ambition is probably going to be First Minister of Scotland. Absolutely. Just before we go on, I want to mention the competition that we had, and that the prizes are as many of these drink mats as you want. We'll send you a bundle of them, and also a light switch sticker in the shape of a Union Jack flag. Now that's totally original. put on your lights in the morning and see the Union Jack flag whenever you hit your light switch. So the question, folks, send your answer to contact@forceforgood.uk. The question is, on this day, which children's programme was launched on the BBC in 1958? Okay, that's a good question for all of our generation that remembers it favourably. Good. Yeah, no. Just this article, which it was headed, Scottish rebellion is brewing against net zero in threat to Labour. And it points out, where is it? Shortly after the tragic comedy of Humza Yousaf's short-lived reign as First Minister, the SNP changed its policy on the North Sea from what was essentially the same as Labour's current uncompromising evisceration of the industry. I think that's a good phrase, uncompromising evisceration of the industry. This is our British government. This is how it's dealing with one of the fundamentals of national sovereignty, which is energy security. Another fundamental, of course, of national sovereignty is border control, neither of which our current government has shown much allegiance to, it has to be said. What does this bubble do? Says Flynn's the secret son of terror leader of the Fordham Baldies from the Wanderers. Okay, I know the Wanderers. I know what you're meaning. There's a chap in that. It's a 1970s film who's really got a shaved head. So I get it.
Relating to the what do you call it? The oil and gas industry. Did you know that we've actually had blackout warnings this week in Britain at a time when they're trying to cut down on our energy, which, as you just said, without energy security, you can't heat homes, you can't power buildings, you can't have a military, you can't do anything without energy security. And NESO, which is the National Energy System Operator, actually issued a blackout warning. I think it was on, what day are we on now, Wednesday? I think it was on Monday they issued the blackout warning. And that is the first time in years they've had to issue it.
Oh my!
Because is it any? I mean, sure to God, it can't come as a surprise to these politicians that in the winter you've got more darkness, you're going to use more energy, it's colder, people are going to heat their homes more. But Miliband, as I said, is still absolutely determined. Doesn't matter what effect it has on people. If, according to Labour's own research, if 4,000 pensioners have to die, then so be it. They can't heat their homes. Mm-hmm. It's just, they don't care. They're not interested at all.
It's one of the problems that we have in a democracy is that there's so much short-termism, and governments get in, they inherit a problem from the past, and they're not thinking. They should be thinking, well, let's have a 25-year plan here. What's Britain going to look like in 25 years? And what are we going to need to literally plan for? Because if we're going to be building any power stations, we're going to have to start building them very, very soon. This sort of thing. There's no long-term thinking because it's like, well, we don't know who's going to be in power in 25 years. Somebody else can work it out. For me, I'm too busy today answering questions at the BBC or with Sky News to actually sit down and figure out what to do. And so it's just like short-termism all the time, pivoting, as this article says, from one extreme to the other. The previous government claimed it wanted to max out on production. The new one seems intent on destroying it. This is not an environment conducive to the very long lead times that investment in offshore oil requires. That's the phrase, the very long lead times. And it's not just in oil that you need very long lead times. It's really in all sorts of planning, especially planning for housing and NHS provision and school provision and doctor and nurses provision and all that kind of stuff. It requires long lead times that our political leaders just don't seem to be applying themselves to address.
Well, as you said, they're going to be out of office. Well, Labour will certainly be gone by the next election. So they don't care about what's going to happen after that. They don't care about the next 20 years. I don't just blame Labour for this either, by the way. I also blame the Conservative Party and the Lib Dems for this. When they were in coalition, they were told that they needed to build new nuclear power stations to keep this country energy secure. And that was 2012, I think. And somebody turned around to the government and said, we can have it built and online by 2022, I think it was. And Nick Clegg turned around and blocked it, because he said there's no point doing that because we won't be in government by then, which just sums up, which backs up your point. Maybe there's certain things that shouldn't be allowed, that shouldn't be the responsibility of unqualified politicians who just want to grandstand. Things like energy security are far too important to be left to a lot of people who simply don't have any qualifications and have won a glorified popularity contest for 5 years to go and earn a good salary in Parliament.
Do you know that that's a good point that you make? It would be good if we probably do have, well, we don't have, but these national energy bodies, departments should be tasked with a long-term plan and basically just left to it.
Yeah.
Keep the lights on, do what you need to do, and build it up in proportion to the number of people that are in the country and all that kind of stuff, and just leave the politicians out of it. And the politicians should really only get involved if something's going seriously wrong somewhere.
And if there's corruption, for example, needs to be investigated or something, fine, do that. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, that's quite a good way of thinking about it, because, and we played a video there of Boris Johnson talking about how he thought it was important to bring in all these hundreds of thousands of people to keep inflation low. But, well, okay, so the inflation, which is a number on a piece of paper, is kept low. But what about, where are the houses? Where are the schools? What's the condition of the NHS to serve all these people? And when are these people leaving? Not bringing them in on short-term contracts, just bringing them in. So we put too much faith in the idea that somebody gets elected to Parliament and they know it all. I mean, they know in most cases less than you and I. Well, in every case, really, less than you and I.
We've got a chancellor that's a failed banker. We've got Wes Streeting, who, correct me if I'm wrong, I think he used to be a hairdresser running the NHS. Keir Starmer used to prosecute people, and now he's head of the country somehow. Jeremy Hunt was the previous chancellor. He'd never run a business. This job requires no qualifications, no set hours of work. All you've got to do is go out there and blag a load of people with a manifesto and tell them you're going to do them some good. And whether you do or not, you're going to be sat there for 5 years, and then I think you get a pension after it as well. You get paid off handsomely when you get voted out. We have a bunch of unqualified people running this country, and we can't rely on the civil service. Me and you have said this before. There's definitely a case in this country for having an American-style civil service where you bring in politically not nominated, but nominated by the party candidates to run in and run different parts of the service, because these people in the civil service have been sat there for so long, a bit like Sir Humphrey Appleby, in a Yes Minister, and that they've been sat there for so long, they're simply in the job because it was their turn, etc. And that's the kind of system we have. The American system is far better than the one we have. Because if the Conservatives could bring in, say, a lot of conservative-minded civil servants, they might actually get some things done without all these left-wing civil servants that are already in there still from the Blair years, blocking everything they tried to do.
Yeah, it's a real issue in a democracy, is who's running that civil government. Absolutely a big issue, and I'm not entirely convinced we've got it right here in the United Kingdom at all.
No.
Especially when we look at the results of things. Yeah, well, look, it's the top of the hour. Thanks very much for coming in. Now, if people want to find you, they can find you on X, at x.com, and it's x.com/AK-writing88, all one word, and also on YouTube. And please do go to YouTube, folks, and follow Ash's site at youtube.com/that Preston Journalist, all one word. And Ash puts out a lot of videos, doing a lot. How is your YouTube channel? Is it growing these days?
Yeah, doing very well, thank you. Yeah, I think it's on 43,000 now. Yeah, going very nicely indeed. Thank you. Yeah,
that's very nice. That's very nice, especially if you're monetized. I can imagine that's very good. Well, long may that continue. Long may that
Thank
continue.
You. It's always a pleasure to come on.
Yeah, good. Well, I know that you've been appreciated. Thanks for interesting insight into the political scene today in the UK. Catherine says, great chat. And Mons says, Ash is great. Watch all his stuff. Fantastic. Eric, who might be a civil servant, says, not all civil servants are left-wing.
Yeah, I read that one.
well, grant there's one or two that are not, Eric. Absolutely. Good. Okay, Ash. Thanks very much. We'll have you back on again, no doubt. And
yeah. Cheers, Alistair. Thank you very much. Cheers, everyone.
Cheers.
See you later. Bye-bye.
Fantastic. That's Ash. Now, folks, it's the top of the hour. I just want to remind everybody, as always, of our shop, where we sell lots of great British goodies, including this flag. Now, we've only got one of these left at aforceforgood.uk/shop-1. Once the one that we've got through in our warehouse is sold, we're not expecting to get any more back in, at least not for a while. So please, if you like that flag, we've got one left. This one's the office one. This one's staying, but we've got one in a plastic bag ready to sell to the first person that goes to the shop. And we've also got a wee book there, a wee book for the Union. And we've got volume 1. Well, you get this one from Amazon. But what we've also got, I should say, is we've got these greeting cards. Is your home here? Defend it. It's a new product that's been in store for about a month now, selling fairly well. Blank on the inside, and on the back there, we've got what it says down there. And if you go to amazon.co.uk and you search for One Big Country, you will be able to get our book, which is called One Big Country. And that's volume 1 of A Big Book for the Union. And for the last 2 weeks, we've been working on volume 2, which is going to be on the matter of Britain's borders. And it's going to be heavily policy related. How do we get out of the situation that we are in? And all we can do is suggest good ideas to the people who have got the power. And volume 2 is going to be all about our good ideas. So that's that, folks. We've had over 300 people watching tonight. I want to thank everybody for coming in. Very busy, so we weren't able to read out all your comments. Now we do, before I've just remembered, we do have a winner. Do we have a winner? We asked the question, what children's TV show launched on this day in 1958? And the answer was Blue Peter, of course. And the winner of the light switch sticker is Catherine Rainey. Catherine, we'll get that sent to you. Please do use the email to tell us where we should send that to. Good stuff. Okay, folks, we're going to be back next week. We'll be aiming for another interesting guest next week also. I want to thank everybody for your comments and your questions. If you haven't already done so, please do repost this on X. Please do share it on Facebook, and please do subscribe on YouTube. So until next week, it just remains for me to say, God bless the United Kingdom and God save the King. See you next week.